Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another episode here of Economic Preppers, where we have Dylan on location, of course, out in Denver. How you doing, Dylan?
Doing fantastic.
Excellent, excellent. And of course, our good friend Patrick, who's on assignment, doing a little homework, a little scouting for the Silver Symposium this week. Patrick, how is bright and sunny Las Vegas?
It's pretty awesome out here. The weather is gorgeous and it is just breezy, and I'm enjoying Vegas again. It's fun.
Good, good, good. All right. Well, we've got lots of different topics to talk about. I'm going to start off with kind of, I'll throw out an ad hoc thing of there's lots of different stories that are out there in the news. Before we get into the economics, I'll just throw a couple things out there. We've got the OceanGate Titanic implosion. We have the Hunter plea deal. We have Congress and several stories with Adam Schiff getting censored. John Durham was testimony. We have the Joe Rogan Experience with RFK Jr. coming on there, and the debate bounty that's out there about jab discussions. I know, Dylan, you wanted to talk about one of these. Why don't you lead us off and tell us a little bit about the missing submarine and what the lesson is to learn from that?
Yeah. This was the dramatic story of the week. It seems like it's come to a tragic ending, although it's not quite over yet, but it doesn't look promising. So I'll just want to mention, thoughts and prayers to everyone whose family and friends are involved with that. That is a tragic scenario. But this definitely captured a lot of people's attention about this just missing sub and this race to find them in time. It was almost like the plot of a movie. It very well could have been a fantastic movie had they been able to find the sub. And you could read more into this story, but I think one thing that I heard when I was reading this article was that they heard a noise a few days ago, like 1 or 2 days ago, and they were searching the area of the ocean where they heard that noise from because they thought that it was from that sub. But there was some commentary that how do we actually know that this noise is from the sub? Like, is it verified? And if not, we're wasting precious time, resources, and attention following a signal that really wasn't the right signal. And the takeaway lesson that I took from that is that, and we like to talk about here at Economic Preppers, like the bigger lesson, the moral of that is that there's times where there's signals out there that you may think are promising or you may think correlate to an outcome or a scenario that you want, but you really need to question and ask yourself, is this the actual signal or is this just noise? Because if you end up following just the noise, you may find yourself wasting precious time and resources on something that is not going to benefit you in the long term and will compromise what your long-term goals are. And so that was something that I took away from this sub story. Then Jeff, you said that you had something else that you took away.
I'm going to chime in a little bit about the signal and noise. I think that, we talk about the buckets 1, 2, and 3, because there's so many stories that are coming at us. We need to separate the signal from the noise and what the news that really matters. Like, do we care about Adam Schiff getting censored, or do we really care about do we care about the submarine, or do we care about what's happening on other stories? There's so many different stories. Like, I saw Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck came back from vacation. It kind of reminded me of what things are like. And you go away, and he turned the news off for 2 full weeks. And they played a game. I'll put a link into it in the show notes. But they played a 2 truths and 1 lie with headlines. And they just brought the headlines to him. His producer said, here's 3 stories. Pick out the one that's false. And it was hilarious to see him try and guess which ones were true and which ones were false. But they were really some very interesting real stories about, people going topless on the White House lawn. He's like, that could be. It was fun to watch. But there's so much noise out there. You got to separate the signal from the noise. But to your point, I found it interesting, just the timelines here. Like, we're talking, and we'll be talking more later in the show about, a potential new world currency. Well, the last time we had a new world currency was 1913, which happens to be the same year that a particular ship called the Titanic happened to go down in the ocean. So full story, full circle here. You have now the sub exploring the Titanic, finding wreckage down the Titanic. I don't think if there's any Rockefellers or Astors on this particular little tugboat that just imploded, but it's kind of interesting that we have another Titanic story 110 years later of the same year where we might have a new world currency. So that was my anecdote of my history and me connecting dots in strange ways. That's what I picked up on.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Patrick, you're probably avoiding all the other news as best you can, but I'm sure you're going to have plenty more to come in on as we walk through different things here. And any particular stories that you've heard of that you wanted to chime in before we dig into more economically relevant stuff?
No, I kind of try to avoid the noise.
Good call. Good call. So one thing as I start to share more stuff here. So I went through zero hedge a little bit, again, focusing on economics here. We have the central banks, and this is a story that caught my eye about how all the central banks they're doing these policy rates and trying to get inflation under control through rate changes, but there's this inherent lag that and it's right here how there's a lag that affects the economy. And now, Patrick, I'm going to lead this into you, because this is something that you talked about with Jack from Nobody Special Finance over in Stock Pulse, and he pointed out that it's like a 12-month lag or so for the interest rates to have an impact. Well, 12 months ago, they started raising rates for the Federal Reserve, and then we started to have bank issues. And then they went from a quarter of a point to half a point. We saw more issues. We just had, I say this month, June, is the 12-month anniversary of the first 75 or 0.75% or 75 basis point rates. Do we expect the same sort of thing to ripple through the economy? Are we going to see more bank implosions? Patrick, what is your thoughts there?
So clearly, interest rates coming due and needing to be renewed so that at the higher rates they are now, they're going to put some pain on people. The reality of where I'm standing, though, is I just don't see anything that's going to stop this train wreck that's coming. The train's moving a little slower, and then all of a sudden it speeds up, and we notice some bumps along the road. But the reality is the banks are going to go down. Yellen has been talking about it. Powell's been talking about it. Gensler's talking about it. The banks aren't able to survive what's coming. The dollar is not able to sustain the economy that we have right now. There's no way that they're going to be able to pull back. Their money supply is shrinking. And now what Joe Brown's talking about is keeping our eye on the reverse repo market. So at the end of the day, I don't see any way that this is going to help. I don't care what the interest rates are. The problem that we have is a spending problem. We're not responsible, and our money is going places where who knows where it's going. There's another couple of $1 trillion that we're unaccounted for again. So at the end of the day, no, our fiscal policy proves that we are not ready to be the world nation's stable currency, no matter how much Fed Powell wants you to think that, hey, the dollar or a stable coin is a good call. Yeah, a stable coin is a good idea as a narrative they're pushing right now. Why? Because it's tied to the dollar, and we know there's nothing stable about the dollar. So what they're pushing for is CBDCs to be regulated by central banks and by these large central banks having the control. And he admits it's going to be a way to track what's going on, but that's what they're not planning for. He said they're not planning for that at this time. I don't believe anything I'm hearing right now. The dollar's going down, and they're trying to do everything they can to sway you away from the narrative. It's all watch this hand, but you don't know what's happening over here.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because it's not just the Federal Reserve, because as we see that Europe has issues too. The Bank of England just this week, they raised 50 basis points. And that's shaking up Europe as well. So lots of other countries and lots of other banks.
Not just Europe, though. It's shaking up the U.S. because when the euro says we're going to make a change, that impacts the Dixie because it's such a huge measurement of the dollar, which is why you saw the Dixie taken. And again, asset prices climbing up, just like Bitcoin is sitting at 30. This is exactly what we expect to see after you see the dollar index drop. Now, again, if the...
Oh, we lost him.
That's all right.
The magic of live television or live broadcasts. So we'll get him back in a moment, hopefully. But Dylan, this is a good time for you. Let's hear your opinion on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in alignment with what Patrick was saying. There's a problem, and a big problem is the spending problem that we have. It's going to be really tough to get out of this kind of spiral that we're in of just constantly adding more debt, more spending, because it's the nature of the system that we have. There's a saying is you can't fix the system within the system. And the only thing the system wants to do is extract more power, more control, more resources so it can keep going as long as possible. And, thankfully we have alternatives out there, alternative solutions that can give people an exit from the system that has just been exploiting them their whole lives.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting with getting back to world economy stuff here and what's going on, and as different countries are trying to sort all this stuff out, and we've got the European banks are trying to sort this out, and they're trying to control their monetary supply, but they're starting to be pandering to other countries that are looking to be emerging, and we talk a lot about the BRICS nations. So I wanted to make mention of this story here that just popped out, which is that the Prime Minister, I'm going to do my best, Narendra Modi. I'm just going to say Modi from now on. So Modi has arrived in the United States, and now I believe Biden's kowtowing to him and trying to get him. They wanted India to try and get into NATO, but India is part of BRICS. So India is a big part of, they're trying. There's like two sides of the coin now. They want to get India into the NATO fold, but BRICS clearly has other plans, and they're meeting in August. And this is what we've been talking about for months, about a potential new world currency that could be just on the horizon. So it's only a couple of months away. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But it's interesting to see how like the U.S. is just, they're trying to get India on their side as another ally here, and looking at an emerging market and a lot of people all at once.
Yeah. I think one thing that popped in my mind, because we have been talking about BRICS and like a new currency and, really big competition to the dollar. I mean, it's no doubt in anyone's mind, the dollar is still, as far as fiat currencies go, the dollar is still like the best one out there. It is the most widely used. I mean, I don't know, you kind of raise your eyebrows, but like,
what's the ugliest kid? It's the ugliest. It's the least ugly of the ugly currencies.
Because like, I mean, they're all fiat currencies, and so like they have their place, and the dollar like has its place. And I think one thing that's interesting is this kind of reminds me of some like just movie narratives and like story narratives. And like there's one where there's a show called it's like there's a couple of them, but like this one's like One Punch Man, and the premise of One Punch Man is like he's just this guy that all of a sudden like got so powerful. He's like this wimpy dude that just got so powerful that he can beat anyone in one punch. And a common narrative that happens in that show is that there's always like a new big bad guy or a new like kind of anti-hero that pops up that looks so powerful and so strong, and like the show builds that character up like they could potentially like take down the One Punch Man. And then when the showdown finally comes and happens, the One Punch Man wins in one punch, right? And so that's like one narrative to think about when we're thinking about this other currency popping up, is that like, it's really easy to build up, especially through media and all this stuff, build up hype around something and for this massive showdown, and think that's going to be an actual threat. And then when the time comes, it just is a lot more fluff than actual substance. Then there's, of course, the alternate narrative is that the classic case of not taking your opponent seriously. And so like it's like what's a good example of this?
Mike Tyson. I think Mike Tyson, when he got beat by in Japan, I forget who it was, but maybe Buster Douglas, maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and so there's that classic one as well, where you think you're so secure in your position that you don't even take this new opponent seriously, and when the time comes for the showdown, like you just get whipped, right? Oh no, the Broncos versus the Seahawks in the Super Bowl that one year. Where
you can go way back to David versus Goliath.
Yeah,
I mean, there's plenty of examples.
Exactly. So that's also a scenario. And, I find myself going back and forth between these two scenarios and thinking like, which one would be better if it actually happened? And is, are these actually playing out, or like, is it something different?
Well, I think that we know that I have a penchant for doing I'm big into history and like looking at different connections. So I had a different thought process this week, and I actually launched a video. I'll post it. I can actually point right here. I'll post it up here as a link on this channel. It was I called it the gold standard fallacy, which is that I started looking at like if they're going to launch a new standard, and I think it's better than 50-50. I had a conversation with somebody today. I think it was from Rob from Stock Pulse, and I said it's better than 50-50 that they are going to launch a new currency, and it's going to be tied to gold in some way. So right now there are allegedly no countries on gold standard, even though you can make a case for China and Russia right now. But if they launch a new gold standard, I mean, what happened the last time, or what's the history of the gold standard? So I started digging, and it's pretty interesting. So I'll share a couple of things that I was looking at, going back to India as well. Whoops, wrong screen, but let's see. That was this one. So these are some of the countries that have been stacking gold. So we have, you have the United States and Germany, and I'm going to mention Germany in a minute, but you have Russia, China, India, all near the top in the top 10. And this is published results. We don't know how much China really has. We know that they mine a lot of gold as well, but clearly these countries are incentivized to have gold and get back on that. And back in the day, like with when the U.S. for the first launched the U.S. Currency, the Federal Reserve, the U.S. had a lot of gold because a lot of gold was extracted or left Europe because they were nervous in Europe because of World War I, that people were going to come by and steal their gold. Yeah. So a lot of it wound up in the U.S. And unfortunately, that led to bad banking practices. But if you dig into further about India, this is a long story from India about bullion, but I wanted to highlight two parts of it. First off, similar to all central banks the world over, the Indian central bank never publishes any physical audits of their gold. They never publish the weight list, how many bars they have, how much gold out there. Basically, the Bank of England doesn't do it. The Bank of International Settlements doesn't do it. Nobody has a full audit of who owns what. It's just not out there. And there was one other thing I want to highlight. Sorry for the scroll, but the IMF, for example, they have 4 gold depositories. They have one in New York, the Bank of New York, the Bank of England in London, the Bank of France in Paris, and the Reserve Bank of India in India. That was later in the story. But no one really knows how much gold there is. And the problem is that, and I mentioned this in the gold standard fallacy, no one's actually audited this. So when I did this, here's the video, and I'll post a link to this there. But you can see the history of money over time, or the dominant currencies. But the first 4, Portugal, Spain, Holland, France, they were the dominant economy of the time. So because they were buying everything and importing everything, their currencies went all over the place. But it wasn't until Great Britain said, hey, you know what, we'll settle stuff in gold. And then the U.S. did things later as well. We got Patrick back. We'll get him in a moment. But when we got gold back, and Britain and the U.S. started to do a gold-backed currency, Britain promised to said, we'll settle things up in gold. But it was in 1847, about 25 years into the gold standard, the first gold standard for England, there was a challenge to the banks and the people. Like, there were runs on banks, there were high interest rates, there was a food shortage, there were high prices. Sounds very familiar to today. Yeah. And what they did was they actually went off their gold standard, and it didn't make a big deal out of it. But they repealed a banking act that was only 3 years old, and said, you know what, this is too much pressure on the banking system. We're just going to deviate and create. And the banker said, the guy who was in charge of the banks, and he actually went before the House of Lords, much like Jerome Powell before Congress, and said, we have plenty of gold. We can make as much cash, no problem. And they created fiat currency. So they've been on a fiat currency system, even though they were on a gold standard, since 1847. They've gone on and off of it. So there's never been a real gold standard on the planet. It's a fallacy. It doesn't exist. The problem with the gold standard is that there's no traceability of who has how much gold. So that's the sort of thing. That's why people were pushing for Bitcoin and pushing for blockchain and seeing how much is really there. And that's why when our previous president, Donald Trump, one of the first things that he did was he sent his his Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, he sent him to Fort Knox to see how much gold they had. First time that had happened since 1974. It's actually listed right down here. But he went there to see how much gold we had. And at the same article, you can see that Germany was repatriating their gold. They wanted their gold back, much like what happened in the 1960s, which brought us off the gold standard. And that's led to Nixon's speech. So the reason I'm studying this history, and I'm going to put out lots of more stories about this, there's a lot of parallels in the last 150 years to today. And history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So there's things to learn about. The gold standard is not the elixir that we have, but I think a gold standard that's auditable with, say, a blockchain of some form could really be the answer that people are really pushing for and would want in the big picture.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up something that's important, and this is something that seems to be the case with gold, like any sort of gold standard, is the problem of like auditability of like how much gold is there. And as soon as you do any sort of like banking infrastructure where you put your gold bars in that bank and you then get a note where you're not circulating the gold through the economy, then that just creates the same problems that we're dealing with today. Right. That just creates fiat currency again. It's like, it's kind of just loosely tied to like an amount of gold, but like you don't ever know for certain. And, big problem is that these banks, these countries, like they're not incentivized to reveal how much gold they have, right?
No.
Like unless they absolutely have to. They can all kind of like subtly agree that gold is something that's valuable, and you can kind of measure your wealth and power against other countries by how much of it you have. They can kind of do that. And if that's the case, it's like, why reveal actually how much you have? Because if you don't have as much as you say you have, right, then everyone knows you don't have as much power as you think you have, or as you are displaying. And if you have more, why would you tell the people you have more money and resources and power than you actually have? It's just a bad strategy. And so going back to a gold standard just doesn't seem like we can dream about it, but it just runs into the same problems. I don't see how that would be solved, especially in this digital age, unless like we go back to actually circulating real gold and silver coins. Then at least the supply of the gold and silver would be distributed amongst the economy. And then there's some sort of like level of trust and belief in that, knowing that you have a certain percentage that's distributed. But it just seems like a very tough sell.
Yeah, I think that we're getting closer to it, because I think that there's the crypto folks, and we're going to get into crypto. There's plenty of crypto and Bitcoin stories that are out there as well, but there's bits and pieces from everyone, right? The gold standard, they're not wrong if it's done properly, but it's never been done properly.
Yeah.
Much like tokenization isn't a bad thing either, but you have to have that full visibility. Like I saw a couple stories. Let me share just a couple more, but as leading towards BRICS.
Real quick on that statement you made. It's not wrong as long as it's done properly. There's another thing that starts with a C and ends in I was going to say
communism,
much more cleverly, communism. That people say, it would work really well if it was done right. No one's ever done it right before. And it's like
didn't we talk about leadership, and we had like the perfect leader was like the dictator that's a benefit, like the Patrick even alluded to it. I believe it was like the beneficial dictator. I think that's the best leader.
Benevolent dictator.
Thank you, the benevolent dictator. But it's kind of a utopian ideal. It's never happened.
Yeah, that was when we had the discussion of like, if Patrick ruled the world, what would it look like? That was what.
Yeah, I think I was so scared I forgot the rest of that.
Yeah, that was it. But so, guys, I'm in the space now. I understand how these gold and silver miners function. I understand what they do. And the reality of what's happening is, and I'm okay saying this, a lot of them are jokesters. There's more credibility to a lot of the shit coins out there than a lot of the junior mining spaces. Right now, what they're doing is they're telling you, hey, guess what? We've got 21 million Bitcoin sitting underneath the ground. But the reality is you don't have it. Okay, 21 million Bitcoin don't exist yet. Right now, That's not how the market cap works. Right now, it's like saying you have 84 million Litecoin sitting in your bucket ready to mine it. That's not how it works. If I'm a miner, I can't just say, yeah, I've got 84 million Litecoin extra getting ready to mine just because I'm getting another 2 million this next year. The reality of what we're trying to do there is actually find who is taking the silver out of the ground and who's actually producing stuff that's going to hit the supply chain. We're concerned about the supply chain. Right now, the benefit of having this silver symposium is to shed light on the narrative that the reality is they're afraid that the crypto markets and Bitcoin took all their money during the last season. But I'm telling them again, we're here to take your lunch the second time around. So if they're not prepared to work with the crypto community and understand how to get on board, they're going to be left in the dust. And either way, the asset prices are going to go up, regardless of what the junior miners are doing, because we understand the need for these assets. So the reality is, I went in to try to understand what is real, genuine silver mining, what is real mining. And at this point, I'm more convinced than ever that Bitcoin mining is more of a valid purpose than any of these junior miners combined.
Well, I got a story coming up that really does link the two, but I wanted to close out the discussion of BRICS because I see it much more prevalent right now. And it's kind of, because there's so many wacky stories out there, it's kind of floating below the radar. But I saw 3 more just in the last couple of days. First off, on Zero Hedge today, I think this is from Jim Rickards, and he's saying that BRICS is that he's screaming about it basically. That they're gonna BRICS and BRICS Plus. It's going to be at the summit in August. They're going to announce a new world currency, and he goes on to that, and he even points out that like if these if these other countries outside of the Dixie, like all tied to gold, then everything that's tied to Dixie, that's like the euro, the won, the yen, the US dollar, the British pound, which aren't tied to gold, that's a problem. I mean, and then like the Dixie is not really reflective of value because it's not tied to gold. So the BRICS currency could really take off. And we have countries like France trying to get a ticket to get in there, which is really disrupting things, because here you have a NATO country saying, you know what, I want to hear about this thing. While a country like Turkey is experiencing runaway inflation. They wanted them to go up to 40% inflation. Now they did 14, but their currency's imploding. So there's a lot to be said about what's going on towards BRICS. And I think that it's really in the end, what I really want to see, and I think it's more than a 50% chance that there is going to be a new world currency, that it's going to be tied to gold and maybe other precious metals, because I know South Africa is big on platinum. So we'll see what they want to do. But I'm curious if they're going to use blockchain of any kind, because if they incorporate blockchain for the first time, now you have an auditable currency, which will change. It'd be a huge game changer for the gold standard, and it's never been done before. So I think that's where the blockchain technology from the crypto world could intercede and interact with the silver and gold and precious metals community. And they could really build something that could be lasting if they do it right. And I'm not sure if they're going to yet, or if they figured it out yet, but I'm really curious to see what happens there in August.
Yeah, and it might not come from the nations or governments themselves finding these solutions, because like Joe Brown talks about, oftentimes the money that people use are the currency that's currently going around and being utilized by the community. So if you have a silver-backed token where you guys know this, silver is my stable coin. When I see Bitcoin profits going up and I want to hold for a while, I put it in silver because I know that that's going to hold its value. It's not going to tank overnight like maybe some other crypto could. And I definitely don't believe that the dollar is stable, so I wouldn't keep anything in any stable coins right now. That's just a big game. So what do? I look for silver, and the reality is there are companies developing the utility to tokenize silver and gold on the blockchain. And that, to me, leads in lower premiums, more equal spot prices, which means I get more bang for my buck. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with those solutions, but you think the BRICS nations are going to jump on those first? They can't get enough Bitcoin. They can't get enough Bitcoin to back a currency. First of all, Bitcoin value is not there yet. Second of all, they're going to have to compete with Michael Saylor and the rest of us who see the value. They just can't get enough of it.
You're on mute, Jeff.
I really like what you were saying, Jeff, but I can't hear it. It sounds.
There we go.
Yeah.
When you take a sip, I go on mute, and then I forget to hit the button. But Jerome Powell's he's opposed. That's what I was saying. Jerome Powell, he opposes anything that gets away from the dollar. So that's why that's another reason he doesn't like stable coins, because even though it's tied to the dollar, it's not in their system. So that's a big thing. And that's why I think that, and I think you were talking about this with Jack, Tether is the next thing that could possibly be imploding this summer too. We don't know. We've all been waiting for this for years. If you've been around crypto for a while, you know that USDT and the Tether project, was the first stable coin that was put on, I think, underneath Ethereum. There's huge questions about what's really backing. There's not really dollars behind it. A lot of people are concerned about it, and it could just crumble very quickly, like another Luna type situation. Mm-hmm. We'll have to see how that plays out. But
some of their holdings are even commercial-backed mortgage securities that are going to take here. So, we don't know what they're holding and what the value of what they're holding is. But one thing that we know for sure is that they haven't been honest and forthright, and we don't know. And that is not in the nature of blockchain. Blockchain is truth. Blockchain is audible. Blockchain is transparent. That's the blockchain that we value, and that's why Bitcoin will always win.
Well, one other connection that I recently found, it's an older article, but it's interesting to note that there's a lot more commonality between the crypto world and the precious metal world, because you need silver to run these miners. Silver is a big component of the computers that run the mining system. So for everybody that believes in Bitcoin wouldn't exist without silver. It wouldn't, because you need the miners to actually run with silver to actually work. So they're intertwined, whether you like it or not. So there are, like, believe it or not, even though that there's lots of synergy between those two communities, and that is what you're going to see in September when you visit the Silver Symposium at the end of the month. For the Stock Pulse to sponsor, and we're also sponsoring as well. So definitely be sure there to click the link that we're going to have in the show notes to get your ticket for, I think it's like $89 to attend. We've already got nearly 1,000 people coming, and we're almost 100 days away. It's going to be a massive event, and it's going to be like the real money event to attend for the year, probably one of the biggest real money events across different platforms that you'll ever find. So definitely check that out. Get your ticket now while you can. It'll be here sooner than you think, but it's a little over 3 months away, and there's plenty of things that are going to be happening between now and then. So, but it's time to turn the page a little bit and talk a little crypto, guys. And I know that we need to talk about that. So that there was the symposium. So. Yeah. Dylan, I know that I think you threw a couple of these articles in about, now we got a new phrase called TradeFi. As Bitcoin is breaking into TradeFi. Whoops, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah.
So let's go to the other story. So Bitcoin is over 30K as TradeFi, or traditional finance, is jumping into crypto. We have Citadel. We have other groups that are getting involved in cryptocurrency. We have all these different exchanges. They're going against the traditional centralized exchanges like Coinbase and Binance US, even Robinhood, but they're now promoting these other ones like EDX, I believe it is.
Yeah, that's the new exchange that they all went together on, and it's actually already running. It's live. It's not like, hey, we're going in on it. It's running. It's live.
So what cryptos were listed there?
Pissed. What cryptos? Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Ether, and Litecoin, I believe, were the 4 that I remember.
I believe that's correct. And
those always seem like those are like the first ones on PayPal, on lots of the other platforms.
Yeah, because they can't compete with a proof of work, and then Ethereum they think is safe because they used to be proof of work, and Gary used to comment on them, but we'll see. I mean, the reality is Gary's pissed. Gary Gensler, there's no way that you can put it back in the box now. It is so far down the road, and now there's way too many eyeballs. This is just the beginning of that crazy adoption curve. It's going to 2025, and this is where I've been waiting for this for almost 3 years. So I'm ready.
It's going to be interesting. And the other thing about this EDX exchange is it's not centralized. I believe it's decentralized. So they do not custodian coins. So they are putting player A with player B. So you have fiat from player A, and then cryptocurrencies from player B, wherever they acquire them, and they just make that transaction happen. They're just providing the price.
Crypto is not player B. Bitcoin is out of your whole game. You can't control Bitcoin. Bitcoin writes the rules. You don't write the rules for Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't change. So they have to play Bitcoin's rules.
And I want to touch on that. There's a couple things here. Is like the fiat system is all about control, right? It's all about centralizing that control. And in any of these systems, like the world didn't just accept the US dollar just because like the US is like, hey, we have the dollar. Like it did it because of the strength of the US military, about our, ability to project force on the global stage. And, of course, like we talked about briefly before, compared to other fiat currencies, the dollar is just better. Like it's better than the Turkish lira. It's better than the Venezuelan bolivar. It's better than the peso in Argentina. It's better than all those other currencies when we're comparing these currencies. So it solves people's problems that they're focusing on that angle, that area, better than other solutions. It's better than most other countries that have tried to do their own currency. I'm not saying this to like say the dollar is amazing, but I'm just saying is like you have to have a good quality product, and then also you have to have a way to secure your product's position in that marketplace. And what I think is going to happen is interesting when we talk about TradFi moving into Bitcoin is that Patrick mentioned is like Bitcoin sets the rules. You don't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin changes you. And you have to adapt to the rules that Bitcoin sets out. So if you're going to start playing with Bitcoin, like you may go in thinking that like you can influence it, you can do things like that. But we've seen so many smart people think that they can go and control and manipulate Bitcoin or use Bitcoin to their whatever advantage. And Bitcoin doesn't follow their rules because Bitcoin makes its own rules. It has its own rules. And that person, that entity, that company gets wrecked. And I think that's something to consider here. And like, I think that's something that also is, I talked about this in a video I made about institutional adoption, and it's coming. but it's also one of those things where you don't want to enter too early because, and the big money really doesn't have an incentive yet, in my eyes, to go all in right now. I think they're just they're staging themselves, and they're positioning, they're jockeying for position. Because when that dam breaks, that's gonna, like, you want to be positioned so you can put money in. But when that dam really breaks, like, we tell people in our group, like, when Bitcoin like starts spiking, that's not necessarily the time to just buy in, right? You got to be careful. But if you're going to have a phase shift where, like, you're talking like billions and billions of dollars that would flow into this stuff, where we're talking about Bitcoin, we're seeing Bitcoin in the 20,000s right now, where that could be just a thing of the past, where Bitcoin's now in the hundreds of thousands almost overnight. That's a different game. And if that's the game that you're playing, like, that's a lot of wealth creation and then also destruction if you're on the wrong end of that. And so I think it's not like, it's tough. It's not like all these companies, like, want to get involved, they want to do it, but they also want to be strategic about it, and they have to be. And I think we're not quite there yet, but it's happening, and we will get there.
I think part of it is, well, and I just made sure my mute wasn't on. But I think part of it is, like, and this is what we do, is like reading the tea leaves, right? We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but when you start to see smoke, they realize there's got to be a fire there, right? So that's why when you start seeing things like, BlackRock applying for a Bitcoin ETF, it's not a given, but is it on the horizon? And do you want to, like, there's the old adage, like, I'd rather be a day early or I'd rather be 10 years early than a day late. Yeah. Thank you. So this could be on the horizon. Plus, again, as I keep coming back, Durban is 2 months out. We don't know what's going to happen there, but Bitcoin could be part of that equation for a new world currency. We don't know. But I think getting some exposure to Bitcoin at this point, not financial advice, but it just seems pragmatic to have just hedge, right? We know gold, silver, Bitcoin, they all seem like they're real sound money. They've proven themselves for the last decade, Bitcoin, gold and silver for thousands of years. Having exposure to those at the expense of fiat, which is garbage, we all know that, it makes so much sense. So I just don't, it's so clear to all of us, but it's getting people, like, there's some people who are just first of all, some people realize, like, yeah, fiat's garbage, but then they get into these camps and they're maximalists on either gold, they're gold bugs and gold bugs only, or silver or Bitcoin. I'm like, why would you not hedge with all three? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. And one thing to say is one big question, and this is, like, from people in the Bitcoin space, is, like, one way that you could basically double your money overnight. Like, so for example, we talked about it a few shows back, where the US has something like 30,000 Bitcoin or something like that, or they've had Bitcoin, they've been selling Bitcoin, and, like, I think it was Michael Saylor that made the comment. He's basically like, well, they could just double the amount of money they have by saying, hey, we're actually not going to sell our Bitcoin, we're actually going to keep buying Bitcoin. Right. And so if they publicly came out and made a statement like that, that would dramatically change the market. That would potentially be a phase shift in how the Bitcoin market operates, or how other people are viewing it, and the speed at which they're looking to move into that space.
That would be a green flag. It's like just being waved to banks and financial institutions and companies. It's just like, green flag, go, go, go.
And so you have to ask the question, or really, like, why haven't they done that yet?
Because there's a clear reason why. How do you buy Bitcoin? You use fiat dollars for 90% of the people. They're using fiat dollars. So you can't set fire to the dollar just yet, because you're trying to, like, again, when I was doing my research, right? When the US emerged in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, England didn't implode, right? But a year later, World War I happened, and all of Europe went off the gold standard. So now the U.S. is the only one on a gold standard. But the Britain tried to get back on the gold standard and tried to be that dominant world currency again in the 1920s. Not many people know that, but they went back. So there's a period of almost 20 years where the British didn't give up yet on being the dominant currency. So it's not without a fight that the last dominant currency goes down. So they're trying to manipulate the market, and it could last for decades. It's probably not going to, in modern age, probably won't. But they're going to try to keep both boats afloat as much as they can as they move assets from one to the other without telling anybody.
Information just moves too fast right now. It's too hard for them to keep it down any further.
But that's why they glut the market with all these other nonsense stories like tugboats imploding in the ocean.
Because the real narrative, and I got this from Into the Cryptoverse. This was Benjamin Cowan. I don't know if you guys have checked out his stuff, but he does good like macro kind of like technical analysis, and he keeps a pretty level head and keeps it pretty real with his analysis. But he was talking about, he's like, look, you have all these like sub narratives, and these things come and go week in, week out. We talk about them all the time, right? Like the latest one is TradFi filing for ETFs in the space, right? And then we have the Dixie going down, TradFi doing that. So people are talking about, okay, this is bullish. We're going to see more money coming in. Also, because the Dixie's going down, Bitcoin's valued in that. You can now, it takes more dollars to buy Bitcoin. So we expect the price to go up, stuff like that, right? But he says the main narrative is a liquidity narrative. And it's, are we printing money? Because you mentioned it before, like, the announcement, hey, we're going to keep buying Bitcoin. Well, how do you buy Bitcoin? Well, with US dollars. Well, you're basically turning on the money printer to buy Bitcoin as fast as you can before the dollar becomes completely useless, right? And that's the main narrative, right? That's what's going to make Bitcoin go up. And the speed at which that happens is determined by how much money is coming into the market and then the publicity of that money. Because if they were to do that and just turn the money printer on, like, because again, Michael Saylor said that, a lot of people in the space have said this, is like the smartest move you could do is if you have a crappy currency, just print your money, and while you can, exchange it for Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's Gresham's law, right? The worst currency gets burned first.
Yeah,
and that's what they're doing. But it's up to people like us that figure it out to tell people what's happening, and that's exactly what happened when bringing it full circle back to when the gold standard was tested. They really just the banks just like they raised rates and they made currency very hard to get. But at the same time, now that's what they're doing now. But at the same time, they're printing the money, they're printing the currency so they can buy Bitcoin, buy the assets that they can, while they're making it very hard for others to acquire the same currency. So that's why the money supply is going down, if you're paying attention, which I think Jack mentioned 1930. And by the way, great job with that interview, Patrick, on stock bulls. But I mean, we're seeing history repeat itself if you dig and look into it. And that's why I'm doing the gold standard fallacy series that I'm going to put out there, because I've seen so many parallels, not just the Spanish flu, but there's lots more that have happened. It's all happened before. And it's, unless they do this new world currency correctly, and I'm going to see if it's on the blockchain or not. That's really one of the first things. If I can't tell how much gold everybody has, then I'm not going to believe it. And remember, one of the letter C of BRICS, I don't think we're going to see full transparency of how much gold they really have.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's no point. There's no point.
Yeah.
Like, that's what's so scary is like when you come from a system that is designed around like obfuscation of the truth, right? Or just outright lies, where it incentivizes that, you're not, that system won't birth another system that is like out of the truth, they'll be separate. That's why we see Bitcoin. Patrick said Bitcoin is truth, because it is. You can see exactly how much is there, and you can't use the same principles or strategies in a system with lies and built on lies and deceit and smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, you can't tell me you've got 3 million Bitcoin sitting in your miner ready to mine. Doesn't work.
Yeah. No,
doesn't happen. And traditional economists and traditional finance people, they'll never understand that, because it blows their mind. It doesn't register what they've learned about securities and mutual funds and stocks and stuff. It's not the same thing. They don't understand the transparency that's inherent with Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. I remember when this reminds me of like a story when I was talking to the banks and they were trying to understand hash power. And I was telling them I have X number of pentahash and I'm about to get the new miners and it's going to, quadruple my pentahash. They didn't understand that everybody else is going to be getting those same miners. So they thought, oh, Patrick is like X% of the hash rate. So now Patrick will be like 4 times as much. He'll be like one of the largest miners in the world. They didn't understand, like, when other people start competing, that the hash rate overall goes up. And when you stop understanding how these market dynamics work, when there is no more gold to put in, you can't back your currency anymore. And that's the problem they're going to have. The only way this could work is if someone like the IMF held a depository for countries and nations, and those nations were deriving a value based off the gold in deposits with that nation's IMF. So it'd be like You have a Chase bank account. I have a Chase bank account. And whenever our loan to value gets a little too high, we got to go deposit some more cash. Otherwise, we can't keep using our credit card. And that's pretty much what
that's
they'll
allegedly
do.
what the IMF does now. As I pointed out earlier, they have 4 depositories around the world: New York, London.
But they'll do it in Bitcoin, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you need okay. Well, you just have to have that traceability, which Bitcoin provides. But they don't want to give. They don't want to open up that kimono. They don't want to go behind the curtain and let everybody see, which will just expose how much they've been lying for years.
They don't have any control. That's really what it comes down to. There's not enough ability for them to control Bitcoin. There's only 21 million Bitcoin, and the ones that are in our wallets right now, for the most part, they're not really going to move around to government hands. Government's not collecting Bitcoin for taxes. So at the end of the day, there's never going to get Bitcoin. The only Bitcoin they get their hands on are from seizures of crimes or FBI investigations. And that's what we were talking about earlier, Silk Road assets. So there's no way for the government to compete with Bitcoin. Not any government, not any world nation. It's Bitcoin all the way. And I'm more convinced of that than ever.
I tweeted something that someone said. I wanted to get the numbers. This is about Bitcoin. So I like to quote this stat. There's something like 50 million millionaires or something like that in the world. There's only 21 million Bitcoin. MicroStrategy has 140,000 at least. And this person tweeted today that the number of wallets with 1 Bitcoin or more has reached 1 million. Okay. So 1 million wallets hold 1 Bitcoin or more. And of course, people have multiple wallets. So it's probably less than 1 million people. But the whole idea is that you won't be able to get a full Bitcoin when this takes off. And when you really start thinking about the implications of that, like a millionaire, what do? They put their money in scarce, desirable assets. They're constantly looking for assets to put their money in because they know fiat is garbage, because they're decent. Most of them, not all of them, but they know fiat is garbage, and they need to put it in something that will store its value over time. Well, they're not going to be able to get Bitcoin. Most of them won't be able to get a Bitcoin, even just 1 Bitcoin. And when you think about that, what does that do when that becomes the game that the governments are starting to play? The last thing you want is to be behind the curve on that and to not be prepared, because then all of the things that you have to use to buy Bitcoin, you can just buy less Bitcoin if you can get any at all. So your purchasing power can go down very, very fast. And this was something that Balaji was talking about when he made that, Bitcoin to $1 million in 90 days, that scenario. Like, if that were to happen, it just really just shows a massive devaluation of all your other things that you have to buy. And it really is to buy Bitcoin, because if Bitcoin is the benchmark where everything is measured against, you need to have that. And if you can't get that, like, you just have less purchasing power on the market than everyone who has at least some Bitcoin. That's one of the powerful things. When we talk about Bitcoin, like it's going to happen eventually. It's just going to keep going. But the powers that be that have the money, the wealth, the resource, the influence, I don't think they want it to take off fast. I don't think they want that. I don't necessarily think we want that to take off really fast either.
No, but I think it's going to be interesting when the CBDCs comes out too, and how that's going to translate to real assets or not. And we could talk about this, I could think, for another hour for sure. But we're coming up on an hour, and I want to just I think that we've done a good job of laying this out. Tell the viewers out there, if you like this kind of content, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Stay tuned for more videos about the gold standard and other things from Las Vegas and other sites. But there's going to be plenty more from us. But Patrick, any final words from Las Vegas for the viewers this week?
Yeah. So as I was out, I asked a couple of people, had some discussions on Bitcoin, silver, gold, about what I was doing there. And one thing is so clear right now. They want our Bitcoin. Guys, don't give them any excuse to get it. Don't put it in an exchange. Don't sell it when you think it's tanking. Don't leverage against it so that you might have an opportunity of losing it, because exchanges know where the leverage calls are. Exchanges can manipulate those numbers. Just don't risk the most valuable asset, in my opinion, that you could possibly hold. You need to really treat that like a scarce asset, like a precious treasure. Hide it away, put it in cold storage. Don't let anyone get it. Never take it out, never talk about it, but just put it away. Don't put it on exchange. Don't leverage it. Guys, just hide your keys, hide your coins. It reminded me of that "Hide Your Kids, Hide Your Wives" song. It's like hide your keys and hide your coins, because it's something that's so simple that I've been saying for so long. And I just feel like the time where I'm going to keep repeating myself is over, because at this point, I no longer need to use a megaphone. The whole world is hearing the word Bitcoin.
Dylan, any thoughts?
Man, we've covered a lot. I'll echo what Patrick says is, don't underestimate the value of something like Bitcoin. It's either going to zero or it's going to 1 million plus. And if you think that it's going 1 million plus, like, it's probably going to be one of those valuable things that you own. And this isn't, I'm not saying this to say, like, this is of course not financial advice. Don't go like spending excessive amounts of money that you can't afford to feed yourself, and putting it all in Bitcoin. Like, don't make stupid financial decisions. But one of the stupid financial decisions that you shouldn't make is selling your Bitcoin, is losing your Bitcoin, is not having Bitcoin, is not being exposed to Bitcoin in some form or fashion, because we're going to look back in potentially sooner than we think and be like, man, I wish I would have bought more. I wish I would have bought more Bitcoin when I could. Right. And so it's much better to be in a situation where, like, you have Bitcoin and you're saying that, versus not having it and saying, how can I get Bitcoin?
Great thoughts. Great thoughts. And I'll just say, like, as I say many times before in other channels and here, question everything. Do your own research. And if you want more research done, please let me know, because I'm digging and I'm finding things. And the more rocks I uncover, the more I learn. So that's how we learn. But that's how you get prepared, so you're not scared. But if you want to know more, check the show notes. Join us at the end of September. There's going to be lots more to talk about. You're going to have thousands of people that are like-minded, just like you, that are, let's say, the dollar is garbage. We need something different. So please join us there in Las Vegas at the end of September. And we hope to see you there, and we hope to see you soon. Like and subscribe and all that good stuff. But until then, be prepared and not scared, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.